Another edition of Behind the Lines presented by BetMGM and TheLines.com. I'm Eli Hershkovich, joined as always by Christian Cipollini, lead trading manager over at BetMGM, discussing Super Bowl 59 between the Chiefs and the Eagles, the second time in NFL history that the same teams will have met in the big game twice in 3 years. The Bills and Cowboys did it going back to 92, early 90s in terms of Super Bowls. So as we look at the last time these two teams met, a thrilling matchup. Kansas City winning in the waning seconds by a field goal against Jalen Hurts. Hurts having an octopus in the fourth quarter, I believe, in that game. Christian, if we drift back for a second, because I know we're going to talk about handle for this one, a bunch of props as well, MVP long shots, but going back to Super Bowl 57, what kind of results do you remember working at BetMGM?
Yeah, so personally, I'd like to forget that Super Bowl as being an Eagles fan. But there's been a lot of talk so far of people just saying they're not interested in the Super Bowl, but I couldn't disagree more because that Super Bowl from 2 years ago is one of the best Super Bowls of all time. Obviously, I remember the field conditions not being great in that one. There was a lot of slipping and sliding around, but ton of points. So it wasn't the best Super Bowl that we've had at BetMGM. We did need the Chiefs in that one. The Eagles were favored in that game. So the book did need the Chiefs, so we did get the outcome we wanted. But ton of points, a lot of big name touchdown scores. AJ Brown went over, so it wasn't the best outcome for us, but an exciting one. And it wasn't the worst. Last year's was worse than that. So we're hoping that at least we can get a good one this year.
Yeah, Patrick Mahomes, at least on the onset, this one isn't setting up as a great result for BetMGM. Who knows what will happen, but Mahomes 8-0 in the playoffs in his career when favored by less than a field goal or priced as an underdog, and on extended rest, so 8+ days for Mahomes to prep for a game, just over a week. 30-4 straight up since 2019. The only quarterbacks to beat him in that situation, Tom Brady, Matt Ryan, Jalen Hurts, going back to last year on a Monday night game where the Chiefs had a myriad of drops, and then the infamous Aiden O'Connell. A little bit of a side note, O'Connell went to my high school, so not that matters a ton, and not that really breeds a lot of similarities per se, because O'Connell has really struggled in the NFL. But Christian, I digress. Looking at this point spread, Kansas City, a juiced 1.5-point favorite, -130 on the money line, total of 49.5. Let's start with the spread and the money line right now. You mentioned the last time these two teams met, the Eagles closed as a favorite. Kansas City, I believe, opened as the favorite in that game, and the market quickly flipped towards Philadelphia. But we have seen none of that so far. Kansas City, if anything, has drifted. The spread and the money line, or at least the VIG on the point spread, has kind of shot in their direction to a slight extent. But where has the sharp action been on the point spread and or the money line early week so far?
Yeah, so you touched on that. This spread has been sitting here at 1.5, and I don't foresee this moving anywhere at all. Sharp action gets a little bit different when it comes to the Super Bowl because a lot of times the sharps have a ton of games to pick from and choose from. They got total spreads, all these different things they can pick from. In this, it's really just one game and one outcome. And it also it's one game and one outcome where we take the most amount of money, the most amount of bets. So if there's a solid market in the world, this is the most solid of them all. So I really don't foresee much more movement. We're sitting at a juiced 1.5 towards the Chiefs, but that could go right back to -110 both sides, but I don't see the line specifically moving. When we did list, we really got a couple sharp bets really early on. We were at Chiefs on the money line at -125. We're now at -130. So that's really the only movement that we've seen from those main spreads in totals spot. And even with that, so far we've seen pretty mixed action. So it feels like we have the right number here. We're getting good money on both sides. So I don't think it's going to move.
Right. You said it last week on the show. Buffalo, Philadelphia maybe would have been a little bit better for the Super Bowl handle, but I'm sure no one at BetMGM is complaining with Chiefs, Eagles. And you mentioned market efficiency too. This pretty much spells it out. The under is 11-10 over the last 21 Super Bowls. I don't think you can get much tighter than that over a 21 game sample size in the big game. But lead official, mind you, Ron Torbert, has the third most penalties called this year and last season. So worth noting, a potential over could be en route if we get a bunch of penalties here. But what kind of action have you guys seen on the total? Because looking at it, BetMGM is the lone sports book to have a 49.5 or at least a 49.5 with minus 110 both ways.
Yeah, we're the last one sitting there. We've taken nothing but over bets, about 7-1 bets coming to the over versus the under. So we've taken a majority on the over, and that's why we're kind of trying to hold where we're at the moment. If we start seeing a little bit more under action, just because we're the last ones at 49.5, we may end up moving into next week. There's probably a decent chance that we'll end up where the market is, but for now, we're still comfortable at being 49.5 because that's the only bets we've seen.
Makes sense. Let's move over to some player props, Christian. Looking at Saquon Barkley, his rushing yards prop closed in the NFC title game at 130.5. He went under that number, so maybe a little bit inflated, probably, if we go back to last Sunday. And looking at the Super Bowl for his rushing yards prop, it's lined at 112.5. It's been up a bit here over the last few days. No player, mind you, has rushed for 120-plus yards in the big game, and who knows where Barkley's number is going to close at. I'm sure it's going to get bet up from 112.5 through the next week and a half to the big game. Since Michael Pittman did it going back to 2003, and before that, Terrell Davis, Broncos running back, did so in 1998 in terms of running for 120-plus yards in the Super Bowl, and he was the last Super Bowl MVP at the running back position. So I'm assuming you're in line with me that Barkley's rushing yards prop is going to close somewhere around 120.5. Where do you think it closes? And what kind of interest have you guys seen one way or the other so far?
Yeah, so it's really interesting now, just off of last week, where he ran for 60 yards and a touchdown on the first play of the game, but still ended up going under his rushing total despite having a great game there. So that is probably going to help us a little bit in this regard because the sharper bettors are going to want this under, but we are going to take, obviously, as you can expect from the public, an overwhelming amount of over bets. Pretty much anybody from the public side is going to take his overs. So it will be really interesting to follow where this ends up. The sharper, smarter people are probably going to end up with a good middle number, I'd imagine, in this, because I do agree with you. I do think that this number is going to just keep going up and up. Despite a lot of the sharp action probably telling us another thing. But this, we just know exactly how much the public's going to take. And I said this last week, I think we could have put Barkley's rushing total at like 140, 150 and still taken over bets. I think that's the case here. Obviously, we'll stay in line with where the market's at, but the public is not going to care what this number is. They're going to take his overs.
Yeah, if you lined it at 140.5, I'm sure you and BetMGM would be taking a ton of sharp action on the under,
Of
at
course,
least
yeah.
more than you've seen now. But anytime touchdown odds, Barkley, unsurprisingly, atop the board at minus 200. Jalen Hurts right behind him at minus 105. Kelsey plus 125. Kareem Hunt plus 140. Xavier Worthy plus 165. Then A.J. Brown at plus 170. I'm assuming Barkley is also leading the way in the anytime touchdown odds market in terms of the handle so far.
Yeah, pretty much you name it on this Super Bowl. Saquon Barkley, anything is going to have bets on the over, and his touchdown scores are getting bet. He's our most bet anytime touchdown scorer, despite being minus 200. He's our most bet first down touchdown scorer. Pretty much any touchdown scoring market, he's our most bet on player.
I wanted to take a look at another Eagles prop, and maybe this will make you a little bit excited. I personally am not that into this matchup, but I'm not an Eagles fan. I'm not a Chiefs fan. I don't have a bet on the side or total so far. I don't think I will, but a bet I do have, I placed last night, was Dallas Goedert to go over 50.5 receiving yards. That priced at BetMGM is minus 115. I may be looking at Longshot MVP odds, which is another market I want to dive into for Goddard. He's priced at 100-1 at BetMGM. We'll see how the market fluctuates over the next week and a half. So not necessarily a bet I want to make right now, but handicapping that one on the surface, Kansas City tied for the fourth most receptions allowed per game to tight ends, and tight ends have averaged 100 or 11.2 yards per grab. 100 would be a ton, and Goddard's receiving yards prop would be much more than 50 and a half. But I have a bet on Goddard to go over that number. And yes, you could argue the Chiefs' game plan and plan of attack defensively last year was to slow down George Kittle, and it worked. But Goddard, obviously, a little bit in the lower tier range at the tight end position. What props are you looking at so far, Christian? Whether it's tight ends, Kelsey, Goddard, maybe even Noah Gray, another name I want to get into later in the show, or any other position that piques your interest.
Yeah, well, that's very funny that you mentioned that one because that was the number one bet that I had listed. Yeah, I'm with you on the Dallas Goedert ones. Over the last couple weeks, they've gotten him involved in a couple different ways. They've hit him with a couple screens, and he's been able to design plays where he's had open yards in front of him to go. And I think obviously a lot of the attention is going to be on A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith. And I agree with you on all those points that I do think Dallas Goedert probably ends up having a pretty good game. So yeah, that was one I really liked. Another one that I like is actually some RJ Pirine. His receiving yard prop, he's been getting a little bit more action. I think that one's a little bit more of a one that probably not a lot of people are going to be looking at, but that was just another one that I was looking at earlier this week.
Yeah, I think his lone catch, correct me if I'm wrong, but that game-sealing catch against Buffalo with the game pretty much out of reach, but icing the game last week in the waning seconds or at least minute and a half of the AFC Championship game. So worth a look there for P. Ryan over receiving yards. I definitely like that take. What about long shot MVP odds? What kind of interest have you guys seen behind the counter so far? Goddard was a name that I touched on. Any other long shots or maybe middle tier looks for MVP in this market?
Yeah, so it's probably a little bit easier for me to talk long shots. From the main players, as you can expect, Barkley and Kelsey are the two that are guarding a lot of bets, two of our bigger liabilities of like realistic players that can win. I also think this MVP market is fascinating because I can't think of another time where both quarterbacks were not 1 and 2 in odds for likely to win MVP. Saquon being second here is very unique and very different. But obviously it makes sense. He's garnering a lot of bets. He's been having an incredible playoff run. When I do talk about more long shots and bets that we have seen, there's 4 players that I'm going to touch on here. 2 are both backup quarterbacks. Carson Wentz and Kenny Pickett have both seen a good amount of bets. I guess just someone understanding that if quarterbacks tend to win this award, so if there's a concussion early or something, one of them comes in, well, I guess you got a $5 bet at 250 to 1, but a lot of people have been playing that one there too. And the one that's surprising to me, but we've taken a good amount of bets so far, is both kickers. Both at 500 to 1. Kickers never won the award. It'd be very difficult for them to do so. But we've taken a good amount of bets on them. We actually have a lot of liability. From the book's perspective, if a kicker ends up winning this award, that will probably mean this was an incredible Super Bowl from the book, because that means nobody's going over. Not a lot of touchdowns are scored. So in case that happens, the book will be okay. But we have taken a lot of kicker MVP bets.
If we go back to Super Bowl 57, I believe it was Brandon Graham or another defensive player that was priced, Hassan Reddick, 30 to 1 to win MVP when the Eagles and Chiefs faced off last year. I remember last year, or a couple of years ago, I should say, last season, I had a long shot bet on Drake Greenlaw, Fred Warner to win MVP. What about defensive players? Any names that have stood out so far in terms of long shots? Maybe not handle, and liability, but just maybe a $5, $10 wager, a couple of them that have piled up.
Yeah, the 2 that probably would make the most sense and that we have taken bets on from a defensive player perspective are the 2 defensive linemen from both teams, Chris Jones and Jalen Carter. Both been monsters so far, and if a defensive player is going to win one, those 2 are the most likely outside of that. We have taken some bets on Zach Bond as well, and a little bit on George Karlaftis. So from the defensive players, those are the 4 most popular I've seen.
Were any of those taken during the playoff run, so maybe entering the wild card round, or was it just truly over the last few days?
Yeah, I mean, we've taken a good amount over the last few days too, but there was some from before. I saw a couple bets on Jalen Carter back when he was 150 to 1, really high like that a few weeks back. Um, Similar with some of the defensive Chiefs players. Chris Jones is one who kind of ends up taking bets throughout the playoffs. His make a lot of sense because if you are betting the Chiefs, you expect that they're going to be in the Super Bowl because they tend to be there often. So, yeah, you knew at that point you'd probably be getting a defensive player at great odds for what they'll be come today.
Yeah, we touched on Jones at least in one of the last couple of shows here on Behind the Lines. As you all know by now, we've teamed up with BetMGM this season. We'll be using BetMGM lines to make all of our picks, and we'll have special offers for our listeners each week. If you haven't signed up with BetMGM yet, use promo code The Lines, that's the lines one word, and you will get up to a $1,500 first bet offer on your first wager with BetMGM. Here's how it works. Download the BetMGM app and sign up using bonus code The Lines. Deposit at least $10 and place your first wager on any game. You'll then receive up to $1,500 in bonus bets if your first bet loses. Just make sure to use bonus code The Lines when you sign up. See BetMGM.com for terms. 21 plus only. U.S. promotional offers not available in New York, Nevada, Ontario, or Puerto Rico. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Available in the U.S. Call 8778-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY 467-369 in New York. Call 1-800-NEXT-STEP in Arizona, 1-800-327-5050 in Massachusetts, 1-800-BETS-OFF in Iowa, and 1-800-981-0023 in Puerto Rico. First bet offer for new customers only, subject to eligibility requirements. Rewards are non-withdrawable bonus bets that expire within 7 days. In partnership with Kansas Crossing Casino and Hotel. Don't forget, if you haven't signed up for BetMGM yet, use bonus code The Lines and get your $1,500 first bet offer today. So we mentioned Kelce earlier in terms of a favorable MVP bet, or at least one that you've seen so far behind the counter. But another tight end that has been an interesting prop candidate early in the season, middle part of the season, but has kind of drifted off is Noah Gray, who's seen fewer routes and fewer target shares since Hollywood Brown returned late in the regular season. What kind of interest, whether it's overs or unders, receptions, receiving yards, have you seen on Gray so far for Super Bowl props?
Yeah, so I've seen a lot of his under bets. His receiving yards at 12 and a half. We've taken about 3-1 bets on the under as opposed to the over. And his reception props, which I believe is at 1.5. Yeah, we at 1.5. We've taken almost only under bets on that under 1.5 receptions. So far, better is not thinking he's going to have much of a day.
In terms of the biggest wagers, I know we've touched on long shots and MVP candidates and Saquon Barkley. We haven't even hit on Patrick Mahomes and Jalen Hurts, to be fair, yet. But what about long shots or big wagers that kind of drift away from the markets that we've already touched on?
Yeah, so it's still really early from that perspective. The one that I can share so far, a big bet that we've taken is we took a $25,000 bet on Travis Kelce to win MVP. So that was one of the bigger ones we can share. But a majority of the big bets that will come in tend to come in next week. Last year, for example, the Super Bowl was in Vegas, so majority of the bettors that were betting did so in the casino, and they would do so in the Vegas casinos, and much easier for them to do it that way. I think we're going to end up seeing the same thing with this one being in New Orleans. I think a lot of our retail books there will be the ones that end up taking the bigger bets, and it'll be more so when those VIP players come down, for the Super Bowl week and spend the week there. That's probably when we'll start seeing the big bets that you'll see on social media.
Kelce is 15-1 to win Super Bowl MVP right now at BetMGM. I'm assuming you guys slimmed that down a bit after the big wager now.
No, we kept it where it was. We expect Kelce action to come in, and generally it is hard for a tight end to do so. There could be a decent chance of some voter fatigue, and he ends up getting it if he has 2 touchdowns or something, and Mahomes doesn't have a crazy good game and they end up winning. So certainly, very possible, but we're comfortable at the price we're at.
All right. And then you mentioned some props that stood out to you earlier. What about side or total for you? Any potential bets? I know it's still early. We're about a week and a half away from Super Bowl 59, but one way or the other, do you expect to have a bet on the spread or total?
Yeah, I mean, I personally have some Eagles futures, and I know that I have bias, but trying to take the bias out, I really do like the Eagles in this one. Just the way they've been playing over the past month, uh, you know, the analysis on how the Chiefs are going to stop the Eagles is going to be stop Saquon, but I don't know how you actually end up doing that. Teams have tried so far and they haven't been able to do so. If they are able to stop Saquon, then Chiefs probably do win. But yeah, I just do like the perspective of the Eagles with that rushing attack. Ideally being able to get a lead, and if they do get a lead, it's really hard to get the ball back from them because of the fact that they can just run it down your throat the rest of the way, control the clock. So just from that perspective, Chiefs have also won a lot of close games this season. Pretty much every close game has gone in their favor. So if this does end up being close, I guess it would lead towards the Chiefs. But I think I'm also leaning a bit towards the under. I'll have to see as we get closer to it. Both are really good defenses. I know the offense are very good, and the Eagles just put up 55 points. But in general, in a game like this, it is two very good defenses playing. So as of right now, I might be leaning towards the under.
Intuition wise, one thing that scares me off the under is the fact that Hurts played well the last time around in the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
One way or the other, it may not matter, but just some 2 cents on my end. I'm probably going to be staying away from the total. I would agree with you, though. If I had to bet over or under, I would take the under, and the best price, as we noted, is at BetMGM, 49.5 minus 110. You could price shop the best odds for any market over at thelines.com, and also check out our very generous promo offer with BetMGM over at thelines.com. So I hinted at this earlier, and I don't want to go without discussing it. Jalen Hurts, Patrick Mahomes, any big wagers on either of those two quarterbacks, or at least sharp bets that you've seen?
Yeah, the one that I've seen, I think I touched on it last week too, but bettors keep flocking to it, is Mahomes over rushing yards. I think I mentioned it last week that he tends to, in big games, go for a big run at a really big moment, and his total always ends up kind of being in the 20s range. For whatever reason, in big games, he tends to go over that, and bettors have seen that. So we've seen a good amount on his over rushing prop. We've got a little bit mixed on Jalen Hurts. We're going to offer later this week a couple Super Bowl repeat options. Hurts to go. Hurts had an incredible game, probably the best of his career in that last Super Bowl in that loss. So we'll have a couple options up. Can he repeat a lot of the things that he did? We'll see if we'll get some action on there, just because he did play well last week. But as of right now, Hurts is a little bit more mixed, but a lot of overs on Mahomes.
And going back to Mahomes, 11 carries, 43 yards, 2 scores against Buffalo in the AFC Championship game. Wrapping up with this, Christian, you mentioned some repeat options for Hurts, markets that have yet to be released at BetMGM. When do you expect for BetMGM to release more niche props like Octopus? I mentioned Hurts had that in Super Bowl 57, the coin toss, maybe even some Taylor Swift props. When are those Swiftie props coming up?
Yeah, so we're building all throughout this week. This first week is really when we're getting a good amount of our markets out. And some of those, if you're not seeing certain markets like Taylor Swift markets, we'll have some of those next week too. But a lot of those markets end up what state you're in. The restrictions are different in every single state. Some states allow certain things, some don't. So it all kind of depends on where you're at. So you got to kind of check with your state regulations to see what they'll allow. But the states that do allow all kinds of unique props, we're going to be posting them. National anthem is always a big one, Gatorade bath, and then the coin toss ends up being one of our most bet props of the Super Bowl every single year. It actually ends up being a top 5 most bet on prop. So that one's a great one. People love that for whatever reason. But so yeah, everyone loves the novelty props. But usually that's later in this week into the second week for us.
All right. And if you're in a state that doesn't offer Taylor Swift props, remember at play.thelines.com, you can win $100 free to play contest in our Swiftie Bingo Challenge. You could also win $25,000 free of charge to enter in the Big Game Jackpot Challenge. Be sure to visit play.thelines.com. Really appreciate the time, Christian, here on Behind the Lines, handicapping and discussing opportunities and sharp action behind the counter ahead of the big game, man.
Yeah, of course. Really excited. This is, the biggest event of the year. It's very fun from our side, the trading perspective, and I'm sure it's fun from the bettor's perspective too. So, yeah, really excited for the next 2 weeks.
For Christian and for myself, Eli Hershkovich, thanks for watching and listening to this edition of Behind the Lines, presented by BetMGM and TheLines.com. So long, everybody, and good luck with your Super Bowl 59 bets.